feel like it's good to warn. It's always a good idea to warn everybody before you hit the record button.
Yeah. So now we are recording and we're letting folks come in, and the numbers are growing, which is exciting. Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait a little bit till more folks join, and then we'll get started. And we've got like a pretty good group already, so I'm just going to get us going. Good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. We're thrilled to partner with One Story for the 10th year in a row for an evening of readings from the 2023 Debutantes. Tonight's virtual prelude to this year's in-person celebration features emerging authors Isaac Blum, Rita Chang-Eppig, Rachel King, Talia Lakshmi Kolluri, Richard Mirabella, David Lawrence Morse, Josh Riedel, and Laura Spence-Ash. Before we start, thank you to all the authors and the team at One Story for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now, just a few housekeeping things. In our Zoom tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and please feel free to chat in the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. It's a great way to show your appreciation for the authors and interact with fellow attendees. Most importantly, tonight's featured books are available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. As thanks for attending tonight's virtual event, we're offering 10% off featured titles. Enter coupon code GreenlightEvents10 into the coupon discount section at checkout online for 10% off. I'll be dropping the links in the chat for your convenience. Each of the featured authors tonight will be reading, and then they'll be in conversation with one another and with all of you. With that, I'll be handing it off to the co-founder and executive editor of One Story, Hannah Tinty. Please take it away, Hannah.
Thank you, Sinead. Thank you, Greenlight Bookstore. We are so excited to be doing this one more time with you all. Greenlight Bookstore is a fantastic independent bookstore for those of you who've maybe never traveled to Brooklyn before, who are joining us from all over. It is just like a beacon of awesomeness. And it is also right around the corner from where we are going to be hosting in just 2 weeks from tonight, our One Story Literary Debutante Ball. So on April 27th at Roulette in Brooklyn, we are going to be hosting this fabulous party, which is a sort of kind of spoof on debutante balls of old, but instead of young ladies dressed in white who are being introduced as marriageable prospects to New York City society, our debutantes are from all different walks of life, from all different ages, and they are debut writers. They're any writer that we've published over the past 20 years at One Story who have published or are about to publish their first books in the current year. So it's something we do every year as our annual fundraiser. One Story is a nonprofit literary organization that celebrates and supports short story writers and the stories that they write. So I'm very excited to have these amazing writers here with us tonight, and they're going to be sharing a little bit from their books. And we're going to go just through alphabetical order. But before I begin, I also am going to encourage everybody to hop into the chat. This is a wonderful thing for online readings, is you get to basically gossip with everybody and write your favorite sentences and respond in time to what these writers are saying. And then they get the opportunity to actually, after they finish reading, to actually, scroll through and get some encouragement, which, as much as, they are these now super professional writers with their brand new debut books, they also need encouragement because they are just starting off in their literary journeys. So here we go. Patrick Ryan, editor-in-chief of One Story, just hopped in and said hello. Hi, Patrick. So everybody, here's Mary Beth, our executive director, and my co-founder of One Story. Mary Beth is here. Lena, our managing editor, is here. There's all kinds of nice people. This will be a nice warm opening. So we're going to start our event tonight. We're going to just go alphabetical, and we're going to start with Isaac Blum. So Isaac is an author and educator. His debut novel, The Life and Crimes of Hoodie Rosen, won the William C. Morris Award and was longlisted for the National Book Award. He's taught English at several colleges and universities and at Orthodox Jewish and public schools. He holds an MFA in creative writing from Rutgers-Camden, and his stories and essays have appeared in the Iowa Review, One Story, the New York Times, and One Teen Story, not just One Story, among other places. Isaac lives with his wife in Philadelphia, where he watches sports and reads books that make him laugh while showing him something true about the world. So, and Isaac published a wonderful short story with us called Cassie to Kids, and this is the first sentence. It was a cold Friday night. Take it away, Isaac.
That's funny because I would have had no idea what the first sentence of that story was. I have fond memories of the story. I hope it's good, but I would have had no idea. I feel like it's not the best first sentence, Retros, but it's cold. Anyway, all right. Hi, I'm Isaac. Thank you for the amazing introduction. And I will now read the beginning of this book, my young adult novel, The Life and Crimes of Hoodie Rosen. And if any of the panelists who I think can talk, if there's any sound problems, just shout at me, please. All right. Chapter 1, in which I celebrate Tu B'Av by taking the first step toward my own ruination. Later, I tried to explain to Rabbi Moritz why it was ironic that my horrible crime was the thing that saved the whole community. He didn't get it, either because he was too angry, or because his head was filled with other thoughts, or because the man has no sense of humor. I don't think it's funny now. It ruined my life, put me in intensive care, and humiliated me and my family on a global scale. But I found it funny at the time. It all started on Tu B'Av, which is one of the more obscure Jewish holidays. I'm Orthodox, but even I couldn't recall what the holiday was about. I only remembered when I looked out the window and saw the girl in white. She was on the sidewalk across the street. I was in halacha class, learning about Jewish law. We were talking about ritual hand washing, and Rabbi Moritz paced back and forth in front of the whiteboard, reading from the Shulchan Aruch, making the occasional Hebrew or English note on the board. I was a little distracted because Moshe Tzvi Gutman was slurping cereal next to me, and a little distracted because Ephraim Reznikov was reading his copy of the Shulchan Aruch out loud, but out of sync with Rabbi Moritz. But I was mostly distracted, trying to remember what the heck Tu B'Av was about. I couldn't ask my buddy Moshe Tzvi because he would make fun of me for not knowing. Moshe Tzvi studies really hard, and he makes you feel like an ignorant schmuck if you aren't as learned as he is. So I just stared out the window as though the answer would be out on the street. And then it was. Because now the girl was dancing, making various motions with her hands, swinging her body around in little circles, which made me remember that Tu B'Av had something to do with dancing girls and the grape harvest. The grape harvest was pretty big back in biblical times. During the grape harvest, all the unmarried girls of Jerusalem went out into the vineyards where the harvest was happening, and they danced, wearing only plain white robes. Because all these girls were wearing plain white robes, the boys didn't know if the girls were rich or poor, or even which tribe they were from. It created a level playing field, and the boys could choose a wife without thinking about if she was poor or if she was from some undesirable rival tribe. The girl outside wasn't wearing a white robe because it was the 21st century. She wore a white t-shirt, its short sleeves revealing skinny arms. The shirt ended just above a pair of shorts that left most of her legs exposed. The legs ended at a pair of white Adidas sneakers, striped blue. She was dancing, but why was she dancing? There was nobody on the sidewalk with her but a small white dog. I thought it was strange behavior, but maybe Gentile girls dance for their dogs all the time. I had no idea. I wasn't supposed to look at Gentile girls. I guess there were Jewish girls who dressed that way too, but certainly not any I knew. And if she was a Jewish girl dressed like that, I wasn't allowed to look at her either. When she stopped dancing, she walked over to the base of a tree, bent down, and picked up a cell phone. Maybe she'd recorded her dance? She stood up, looked over, and made eye contact with me. Or I thought she did. It was hard to tell from that distance, but when she looked up at me or at the school, I reflexively looked away, up at the board, at Rabbi Moritz. The contrast between the girl and the Rebbe couldn't have been starker. He wore a heavy black suit and had an enormous beard. And Moritz was spitting as he talked. He had a little bit of saliva on his upper lip. Why, according to the text, the Rebbe asked, must we wash our hands upon rising in the morning? Why, before we walk 4 cubits, must we wash? Ruven was all over it. We have left the chance for evil spirits to come onto us in the night, so we washed them off, the spirits. Amazing. As Ruven said, we have left ourselves vulnerable, Moritz went on, his voice rising to vulnerable, pausing, then descending, not only to the spirits of evil, but what else? His voice rose again, and the question came out in a high-pitched squeak. What else? Ruven again. The spirits have come, and depending on how you read it, our souls have departed, right? Correct. Our souls have departed through our hands, through cleansing, and through the Modeh Ani prayer, our souls return, and we are ready for service of Hashem. Everything Moritz said came back around to service in God. What if you wear gloves? Asked Moshe Tzvi. He was working on his cereal, but he paused to gesticulate with his plastic spoon, spraying little drops of milk across the desk. You know, when you sleep, must you still wash? Rabbi Moritz paused in his pacing. That's a good question, he said. I would say, based on the text, that the gloves would keep your soul in your body, though of course this would be impractical, sleeping in gloves. Okay, Moshe Tzvi said, scratching his bare chin. Now what if the gloves have a small hole in them? What are the dimensions of the soul? How squeezy is it? And we'll stop with a sentence that has the word squeezy in it, because it's a fun word. Thank you. That was fun. Can't wait to hear the next person.
That was amazing, Isaac. Thanks so much. Oh my God, what a great beginning. I can't wait. This is really, really fun. Okay, our next reader is Rita Chang-Eppig, and she is the author of Deep as the Sky, Red as the Sea. And she received her MFI from NYU. Her novel about the legendary pirate queen of China, Deep as the Sky, Red as the Sea, is forthcoming from 2023 from Bloomsbury. Her stories have appeared in Best American Short Stories 2021, McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, Conjunctions, Clarkesworld Virginia Quarterly Review, and One Story. She has received support from the Rona Jaffe Foundation, the Vermont Studio Center, the Writers Grotto, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, and the Martha Healsley Cox Center for Steinbeck Studies at San Jose State University. So she's also the author of one of our most recent issues, Walking the Dead. And here is the opening line. The dead came in the night, plodding in a single file behind the priest with the loud gong and the lone lantern. Take it away, Rita.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. And of course, thank you, One Story, for putting together this really amazing reading, as well as the Debutante Ball. I'm super excited about the ball in 2 weeks. So I'm going to be reading from just the opening of my novel, because I think it's easier. I wouldn't have to provide any context. All right, so I'll just go ahead and start. The moment Sek-Young saw the enemy's cutlass carved through her husband, she learned 2 important things about herself. First, she loved Zeng-Yat more than she'd ever thought she would be able to love the man who had, without much consideration of her wishes, stolen her away to the sea. Second, she would not mourn him. Their fleet had passed the 10th lunar month here, raiding off the coast of Vietnam, sails and spirits both a bit tattered after the most recent typhoon season. Merchant ships were passing through the area on their way to the Chinese emperor, each laden with silver like a noble's bride under her headdress. The emperor needed all the silver because he had spent the past few years suppressing rebellions all over the country. The imperial treasury was empty. Nevertheless, he'd recently launched an expensive campaign to end piracy in the Pearl River Delta. Not that the new laws had made any real impression in the minds of people like Sek-Young and her crew, who lived and died by the sea's vagaries. They were starving long before the milksop emperor succeeded the throne, and they would be starving still had Zeng-Yat not gathered them like limp reeds and bundled them together to make them storm-worthy crafts. So yes, she loved him. She loved him because she feared death. Slashing her way to his side, crouching instinctively at the occasional boom of cannon fire, she shouted for Chung-Po to come to her aid. The boy spun around at her voice, narrowly sidestepping a dagger to the gut as he did so. No, not boy anymore. She just still thought of him as one, even though he was already 25 and would soon inherit Zeng-Yat's fortune. His habitual smirk slackened at the sight of Zeng-Yat sprawled on the deck with the dark sash of blood across his torso. He loved the man, too, in his own way. It had all gone very wrong very quickly. They boarded the Portuguese merchant ship in the night. If the ship had been full of silver for the emperor, they would have been looking at a windfall. Even if they'd found only sugar and sapwood, they would have still done well for themselves. A few of her men could have made enough to feed their families for the entire year, could have returned to their homes farther inland until the next famine came along, which it always did. But the Portuguese had come prepared for war. The ship was awash with Portuguese Navy sailors, all trained to stand against the pirate ships that fogged the harbors of the South China Sea, all awake, despite it being the dead of night, as if forewarned. Perhaps they'd been sent directly by their government to secure the trade route, or perhaps they worked as soldiers of fortune in their spare time. Europe almost certainly had its own share of famines. Last she'd heard, a madman named Napoleon had gotten himself elected as the first emperor of France and was warring against 7 nations at once. Where there was war, there was hunger. The foreigner who had injured Zheng Yat, fighting through what appeared to be a dislocated left shoulder, cleaved apart yet another one of her men with his good arm and turned his attention on her. His size alone made him formidable, and if he'd felled the commander of the feared Red Banner fleet, then his fighting ability was likely first rate. Sekyung stood to gain nothing from a one-on-one fight. As far as she was concerned, honor was scarcely different from stupidity. He lunged at her. She reached behind her back, pulled out the flintlock pistol she kept there for emergencies, and whispered a prayer to Mazel that the black powder had not gotten wet in the chaos. A loud crack, and then the smell of charcoal and sulfur filled her mouth like a piece of burnt, rotted fish. The foreigner fell backward into the taffrail. Unsure whether she had dealt a final blow or simply grazed skin, she strode over to the man and kicked him into the sea. She hadn't gotten to where she was in life by not being thorough. The numbers were on their side. Piracy was, more often than not, a matter of convincing the target of the futility of fighting back. The fleet probably would have triumphed had they continued the battle, except the merchant ship caught fire. A member of her crew might have set the fire deliberately, or someone might have knocked over a lamp. "Retreat," she yelled. Smoke grew thorns inside her lungs, re-emerging from her mouth as gray roses. To Chung Po, she said, "Help me get him back to the ship." Somehow they managed it, helped in part by the fact that the Portuguese became preoccupied with putting out the fire. When she ordered Vin to set a course for Hainan, Zheng Yat tugged on her sleeve. "Canton," he said. "That's ridiculous," she said. "You'll never make it to the physicians in Canton." "I won't make it either way." If their relationship had been anything other than what it was, she might have tried to convince him he would live through this as he'd lived through so many other injuries in their 6 years together. But she was his wife, captive, chief strategist, and equal partner. Her days of muttering empty reassurances into the ears of powerful men as they lay in her arms were behind her. "I'll see to it that your family gets word," she said. I'll stop right there. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, that was beautiful, Rita. This just like reminds me, we go from like, teenage hormones and like girls dancing in white to like pirate mayhem. It's like you just sort of don't know what you're going to get from like one issue to another or from one book to another. So this is just fantastic. So thank you. That was great. I just want to remind you, for those of you who are using the chat, make sure that you put when you're adding your note to actually put it to everyone, because otherwise your note is just going to the panelists. We can see the wonderful things that you're writing, but you're not sharing your wonderful comments with the whole group of the audience. So just click on everyone and it'll go to the whole group. So, all right, next we are going to have Rachel King, the author of Bratwurst Haven, I should say. She's the author of the novel People Along the Sand, the Link short story collection, Bratwurst Haven, and 2 poetry chapbooks. Her short stories have appeared in One Story, North American Review, Green Mountains Review, Northwest Review, and elsewhere. She lives in her hometown of Portland, Oregon, and currently works as an editor for an infusion nursing organization. She published a great short story with us called Railing, and this is the first sentence. "I got a job at Louisville Sausage the fall after I'd been let go from my position as a railway engineer." Take it away, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you everyone for being here, and to Greenlight Bookstore for hosting us. My collection's been out about 6 months now, and at different events I try to read different stories. So I'm going to read the beginning of a story tonight that I haven't read anywhere. It's called Strangers. It's the 9th of 12 stories. On one of the last days of August, Nathan headed into the mountains after work. He coasted through town, then out of it, orange boulders on his right, a creek on his left, and as he drove higher, he saw wildflowers. After he passed the town of Nederland, he turned down a gravel road, plunged through an aspen grove, then dipped into a valley, scrubby bushes on either side. The decent gravel became potholed gravel after a mile. The potholed gravel became, after another mile or two, just dirt and potholes. His Jeep could handle the rough roads, but the bouncing revived an upper back injury. At the bottom of the ravine, he pulled over. As he got out, he noticed a miner's shack and a 90s silver Corolla beyond a grove of trees. Sometimes physical movement made his back feel better, so he walked down the road and back. That didn't help, so he popped a couple ibuprofens and lay on the ground between his Jeep and a blooming cactus. He breathed deeply, closing his eyes as the pain lessened. When he opened them, a small woman with long, scraggly black gray hair stood above him. She wore jeans and a red sweatshirt with a very faded, cracked white logo on it, and squinted, arms against her chest. "I'm okay," he said, just stretching the back. "How'd you get down here?" she asked him. It felt as though she was accusing him, he thought. Well, maybe she was a squatter or back to the lander. He could be invading her space. He sat up and nodded toward the Jeep. His wife had died 2 years ago, and since then he'd spent dozens of late afternoons driving around simply because he didn't want to go home. "How long have you lived out here?" he asked. 2 years. "Must be difficult to live without neighbors," he said, standing. She stepped back as though threatened by his 5'2" figure. He wasn't used to that kind of response from anyone, women included. "It's okay once you get used to it," she said. "Mind if I take a look at your homestead?" "I guess not." She ushered him slightly in front of her as they walked around the shack and over to the garden. Zucchini vines covered an entire plot, which was outlined by a fence of stacked and weaved branches. To the side of the garden was an old picnic table on which lay a pile of zucchinis, a grater, and large Ziploc bags. "My garden, my house," she said, pointing. "Then excuse me, I've got to finish this." She plopped at the table and started grating. He looked at the high rock faces on either side of the valley, then up the steep, potholed road from which he'd come. He felt as though he'd entered another world. But wasn't that the point of his aimless driving, to experience another reality, if only for a few hours? He stepped to the table. "Need a hand with anything around here? I'm pretty handy." She squinted at him again. "I'm okay," she said, "just getting ready for a freak snowstorm." Down in the foothills where he lived, winter was the last thing on people's minds, but up here there could be snow. He sat across from her. The shape of the grated zucchini reminded him of the maggots in the dumpster behind the factory where he worked. He'd seen them earlier, slithering through waste. He'd gagged, then gone inside and told the other guys that they'd multiplied. "By the way," he said, "I'm Nathan." "Julie," she said, not looking up. He asked what brought her out here. He thought of his own neighbors, how they all had a good rapport with one another. He imagined telling Kevin at the corner house tonight about the maggots, how his boss Gus had overheard the complaints and yelled that, God damn it, he couldn't control the hot weather. Kevin would say that ever since the recession, Gus had been a son of a bitch, and Nathan would feel a little better. "I'm on wait list for low-income housing in Boulder," Julie finally said. "I might as well wait out here." Nathan felt lucky he and Anne had bought decades ago when housing was cheaper. He wondered if they'd divorced, as he'd suggested twice in the months before her fatal car accident, whether he'd be the one renting now. "Free rent out here," he said. She grabbed a handful of grated zucchini and stuffed it into a bag. "But you've got to have a lot of know-how. I can imagine. I drive into Nederland once a week, if I'm not snowed in, to check the internet, the library, to see if my status has changed. Still 50 people ahead of me. After 2 years, it was 150. Let me help you with that," Nathan said. All done, Julie stepped over the bench and hoisted the 4 plastic bags into her arms. "Be right back." He followed her halfway to the door, but she kept glancing back at him. She didn't want him in there, and she didn't like to be followed, he thought, so he dropped into the dirt and did some back stretches. A few minutes later, he heard her heading toward him. "Don't step on me," he said. For the first time since he arrived, she smiled. "What's with your back?" "It's an old injury," he said, "from when I worked construction." Anne had nursed him after the construction accident, then encouraged him to use the settlement money to learn a trade. He ended up going to school to be a barber. They were getting on well then, and he wanted to please her. She nodded. Do you want some food? It had to be dinner time. He hadn't noticed that. If it won't put you out. Come on in. Again, she ushered him slightly in front of her. Her shack had a single bed on the left, a kitchenette on the right, a table under the window, and a wood stove in the middle. Just the essentials, she said as she headed toward the kitchenette. She was taking deep breaths, but didn't look over her shoulder. We'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And something I forgot to also mention is that her book is a finalist for the Colorado Book Award. So congratulations, Rachel. We'll keep our fingers crossed for that. So next we have Talia Lakshmi Kolluri, author of What We Fed to the Manticore. Talia is of mixed South Asian. She's a mixed South Asian American writer from Northern California. Her debut collection of short stories, What We Fed to the Manticore, was longlisted for the 2023 Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, the 2023 Aspen Words Literary Prize, the 2023 Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize for Debut Short Story Collection, and was selected as a 2023 ALA RUSA Notable Book. It's available now wherever books are sold. Buy your copy at Greenlight tonight. Her short fiction's been published in the Minnesota Review, Ecotone, Southern Humanities Review, The Common, One Story, Orion, Five Dials, and the Adroit Journal. A lifelong Californian, Talia lives in the Central Valley with her husband, a teacher and printmaker, and a very, very skittish cat named Fig, who hopefully will make an appearance. That's my favorite part of any Zoom, is when the cat shows up. So Talia's story, Let Your Body Meet the Ground, was published recently in One Story, and this is the first sentence. The way it was before, after night rest on the edge of the roof of the tea stall, the sun would flood the sky with colors, and I would begin to calibrate my sun compass. Welcome, Talia.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So excited to be here. I am going to be reading a story from my collection, What We Fed to the Manticore, and this one is called The Dog Star is the Brightest Star in the Sky. In the beginning, there was nothing but the bear. And then he growled, and from his icy lungs, the whole world unfurled. Tell me a story, said the fox, bathed in the light from a low-hanging moon, the surrounding snow lit by a cool silvery glow. The moonlight touched everything, the fox, her fur fair and glittering, the mountains in the distance, the glacier nestled in a valley leading to the wide expanse of ice fields and snow around her, the sea beyond the coast and the icebergs that rose up from the dark ocean. The fox was nestled in the crook of the bear's neck, who was himself curled on the snow, his back a jagged mound in the incandescent night. The white bear. Tell me a story, she said again. Tell me a story about the beginning. I don't remember the beginning, said the white bear. He yawned widely and sat up blinking. He looked out at the tundra around him. The surface undulated like a world in miniature, mirroring the surrounding mountains. He thought of the edge of the coast, buried in permafrost, stretching to the sea. The white bear lowered himself again, and the fox returned to him. It doesn't matter if you remember it. You know it. That's what matters. Maybe all I see is the end. Maybe the end is so big that it swallows the beginning. Maybe there is no beginning anymore. The white bear was tired. Tell it. The fox pulled her head out of the bear's coat and nipped him in the cheek as if to say again, tell me. The bear breathed deeply and felt the ground beneath him shift. In the beginning, said the white bear, there was nothing but the bear. You? The bear is you? Not me, not just any bear. The first bear. Yes, said the fox, burrowing back into his coat. Start again. In the beginning, there was nothing but the bear. And then he growled, and from his icy lungs, the whole world unfurled. First, he spit out the stars, white like snow, shimmering like snow, and they lit up the world he was making. And then came earth, dark soil that he shaped in his paws. With his claws, he scraped out valleys and pushed the earth into mountains. These mountains? Asked the fox. She turned toward the peaks that held in the tundra from a distance. All the mountains, said the bear. He built rolling hills and vast spines of sharp peaks. He pushed some so high that they almost reached his stars. With his enormous paws, he spread sand into wide and windy deserts. He scattered rocks and boulders. He bored out caves. He molded the world until his paws ached and he could build no more. And when he looked at all of it, the first bear wept at the beauty of what he had made. His tears filled the seas and pushed their way through the land into rivers where they finally pooled into lakes. And when the water touched the soil, all the plants began to grow. The bear growled louder and louder, calling forth all the animals from deep inside himself until all the water and all the land and the whole wide world was filled with life. Birds flew out of his mouth, insects buzzed from his ears. Every living thing came from the bear, and then he brought forth the very last thing. What was the last thing? The fox's voice was muffled because her snout was buried in the white bear's fur, but he knew what she was asking. She asked the same question every time. You know what the last thing is, said the white bear. He thought suddenly of the icebergs he would see on the next day's hunt, how the ice turned blue at its curves. He thought of the floes he would ride across the water. I want to hear you tell it. The very last thing brought forth by the very first bear was a fox. Tell why it was a fox. Because the first bear needed a guide through the new world he made. He needed someone to see it with, someone nimble who would watch out for him. He needed a friend. The fox leapt out from the bear's neck, spun in a circle, and curled up once more. He needed a friend. The white bear tucked his head around the warmth of the fox's body and closed his eyes against the night. And he dreamed, as he always did, of the world as it was now, the world as it was before he was born. And in the moments right before waking, he dreamed of the first bear. And I'll stop there.
Man, every story should have a bear. Thank you, Talia. That was amazing. So great. Wonderful. This is like bringing me so much joy, I gotta say, just hearing your voices one after another. It's just so fantastic. All right, our next author is from the early days of One Story, David Lawrence Morse, the author of the Book of Disbelieving. Originally from rural South Georgia, David Lawrence Morse studied in Russia after the collapse of communism, cleaned toilets in Yosemite, and taught English, then lived on a rice farm in the foothills of Yamaguchi, Japan, before eventually earning an MFA in fiction from the University of Michigan. He's now the director of the writing program at the Jackson School of Global Affairs at Yale. His work has appeared in the Washington Post, One Story, Missouri Review, Alaska Quarterly Review, and the O. Henry Prize Stories, and elsewhere. His first play, Quartet, was performed by the Takas Quartet and the Colorado Shakespeare Festival. In his spare time, Morse renovates old houses, watches fantasy movies with his family, and tosses the frisbee for his border collie, who wishes he could throw it farther. David published Conceived with us. It is issue number 43, and then we are now on issue 300. So that tells you the early days. David, thank you for taking a chance when we barely were off the ground. This wonderful story, which I will never forget, working with this on this story with you, called Conceived. And here is the first sentence. Our village is built on a giant fish, Sita. So sizable, we have room for 19 huts, built with the bones we find floating on the sea. Please help me welcome David. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Hannah, and thanks to One Story and to Greenlight for hosting this great event. Hannah read from a story called Conceived, which is in the Book of Disbelieving, my collection of stories, renamed The Great Fish. I'm going to read from another story from the collection tonight called Spring Leapers. I'm going to start from somewhere in the middle of the story, so to just give you a little bit of information so you can follow along. This story is set in a village where one day each year in the spring, they all collectively leap off the rooftops of their houses in an effort to reach heaven. And sometimes it works out and someone gets lifted up into the sky, up into heaven, and that happens is called being obliged. So remember that term, being obliged. You're going to meet a couple of characters, Lawton, who is goaded by his sister into climbing up onto a high tower. He's trying to decide whether he's going to leap off the tower or not. And Magdalene and Octi, who are madly in love with each other, have decided to leap together into heaven. So they're bound together by a harness. So this is Spring Leapers. Lawton crawls on hands and knees, careful of splinters, to the platform's edge. Better to observe the leapers, who are leaping off the rooftops. They leap with honest joy and abandon, shouting out to God and leaping, singing the leaping hymns and throwing back the bottle. Lawton watches his neighbor, Grace Guthrie, take a running start from the ridge of his roof and leap gracefully off the precipice, arms spread like an eagle. Grace's drunken brother tries the same trick, but lacks his brother's style. He stumbles and tumbles off the edge, landing flat on his back. He doesn't give up. The villagers toss infants into the air and catch them. Some linger on the rooftops all day, drinking and dancing and singing, leaping, then falling, then climbing to the roof to leap again. Even the elderly. There goes old Strictly. He sits on the edge of the roof and hangs his legs over and eases off the edge as if into a tub. He falls to the earth, but soon is on his feet, dazed, limping. It is just as Lawton's sister said. Even the old folks will risk broken bones for a ticket to heaven. But Lawton wonders, what's so great about heaven anyhow? The distant cowbells sound like dull wedding bells. An eagle hovers above. The gnats wobble in their crazed agitations. The leapers shout with laughter. How could heaven be any better than this? And then there is Octi and Magdalene, who stand at the edge of the roof, straddling the harness, Magdalene holding on to Octi's back. When I say leap, we leap, says Octi. Magdalene glances at the small crowd that is gathered in the scrap and grass enclosure of the yard. She waves and calls out hello, and then hisses at Octi. This is silly. Don't you love me? Asks Octi. Why can't we just hold hands? Asks Magdalene. When I say leap, we leap, says Octi. They practice simultaneous knee bends. Then suddenly Octi shouts, leap, and he leaps. Only Magdalene doesn't leap, and Octi tumbles off the roof, roped to the immobile Magdalene, and she tips over with his falling weight and tumbles after. Some in the crowd gasp, and others guffaw, but they don't guffaw for long. The couple is caught as if by an invisible hand and lifted into the sky until the rise is halted. Hellfire, shouts Octi. Octi, shouts Magdalene, as they hang suspended 30 feet high, clasped together and dangling for all to see, like mythical figures caught in the act of illicit congress and made an example to the world. The villagers have seen plenty, but they've never seen this, and they quickly come running. What are they caught on? Asked Wiley Cooper, the beekeeper. Caught on nothing, says Grady Merkel. Somebody get my lasso, says Wiley, and we'll haul them down. Can't haul down somebody obliged, says Grady. That's not obliged, says Wiley. That's stuck. Could be obliged, says Grady. Just taking longer than ordinary. Hello? Calls out Wiley to Octi and Magdalene. Can you hear? Hellfire, shouts Octi. Octi and Magdalene kick and grimace. They wag their arms as if trying to fly, hanging there, neither sinking nor ascending, but dangling in the sky as if on a string. Somebody tell us how we're supposed to do this, shouts Octi. Get the Reverend, someone says. But the Reverend Colonel has already arrived, has been watching for some time, his arms crossed on his chest, unimpressed by even this. And they ask what should be done, and he offers another parable. 2 soldiers are both killed in battle and go to heaven. One sings for joy, the other weeps. Why are you weeping? Asks the one. It's not what I expected, says the other. Meanwhile, the villager has retrieved Wiley's rope. They form it into a lasso and hurl it toward the couple, but it's not long enough, and someone strikes out in search of another. I will not be roped and hauled down like a heifer, says Magdalene to Octi. What the hell are we supposed to do? Says Octi. Undo the buckles, says Magdalene. Magdalene, says Octi. Undo the buckles. Hellfire! Magdalene pulls at the buckle. Octi tries to stop her, but she pulls the buck knife from his back pocket and savagely cuts at the rope, holding him to her. He tries to turn the harness to stop her, but he is bound facing forward and she cuts through the rope. She cuts the last rope, and the harness falls, and Octi falls too, while Magdalene lingers in the air. Octi snatches hold of her foot, but she is seized with the desire for rising. "Forget it, mister," she shouts, kicks her foot free, and rises heavenward. She laughs, tickled, as Octi cries out one last time, and the crowd cheers and clears the way for Octi's fall. Stop. Thank you.
That was fantastic, David. Thank you so much. And this is what I love about short stories, right? You're able to, like, whether it's living on the back of a giant fish or, like, you know, getting lassoed on your way to heaven. Just so much fun, right? So much fun. It's fantastic. Thank you. So our next reader is Richard Mirabella, author of Brother and Sister Enter the Forest. And Richard is a writer and office worker living in upstate New York. His work has appeared in Story Magazine, American Short Fiction Online, Split Lip Magazine, and elsewhere. His first novel is called Brother and Sister Enter the Forest, and he published a fantastic piece with us for One Teen Story called Mold. And Patrick was talking today in the One Story office about how this is his favorite One Teen Story cover, Rich.
Yeah, I love that cover.
It's a great cover. And here is the first sentence. The mold first bloomed in the den. Take it away.
So I'm going to read. So my novel takes place in the present and in the past. So the characters, the brother and sister, are teenagers in this section. This is right after the brother, Justin, has gotten terrible sunburn. That night, Justin lay naked and burnt on his bed. He wept. "Help me," he said, "Jesus fucking Christ." Willa heard him first. Then their mother came running into the room. "He was on the roof," Willa said. She put her hand over her mouth so it slipped out. She tried not to notice his naked butt. He must have taken his underwear off at some point. It was as red as the rest of him. When he tried to go back into the house and found the window locked, he'd called and called for her like a dumb giant bird. She listened to him for a while, trying to be mean, the way he was with her. But eventually she went up to let him in. "On the roof," Grace said, "naked?" "No," Justin said, "she's lying." "What do you mean, no? I can see your bright red ass for myself." Grace sat on the edge of the bed and handled his body, examining him. He shrieked. His skin looked bloody. "Mom, stop it, please," Willa said. "What horrible thing did you do to yourself?" Grace said. Her voice had softened, the anger fizzing out. "I'm sorry you're in so much pain, but it's your fault." His only audience had been some blackbirds hanging out in the trees. None of their neighbors had witnessed his nakedness, as far as Willa knew. But she'd sold him out to their mother so quickly. Somehow, she'd have to ask his forgiveness. Willa ran into the kitchen and took frozen aloe leaves out of the freezer and brought them to her mother. Grace snapped one in two and slathered the yellowish juice on her fingers and painted Justin with it. To escape his screams, Willa ran from the room. Later, she sat on the floor among Justin's clothes. Their mother was sleeping. "You don't have to stay with me," he said. "I'm going to puke." Willa jumped to her feet to get out of his path. Instead of rushing to the bathroom, he raised his head off the pillow, locked eyes with her, and emptied his guts onto the carpet. The next week, his skin started to peel off in white strips. Willa found it discarded here and there. He left it for her. She saw him unwrapping it off his back in front of the bathroom mirror. "Help me," he said. He wore boxer shorts and nothing else. The bathroom smelled of the coconut-scented lotion he'd been using. No, she didn't want to. Where he'd removed his skin, a pale pink, vaguely shiny flesh appeared, his face polished and new, a model of Justin. "If you're not going to help, go away." She remembered how he had cried and begged. She remembered selling him out. Fine, she said, and chose a flake of skin on the center of his back that begged to be pulled. It detached easily and floated to the floor. Justin laughed. You'll do anything, he said. She had once loved him too much, crushed on him. She hated to think about it. If only she'd been too young to remember, but it must have been when she was 7 or so. It was obvious, too. You're getting older, her mother said. You can't flirt with everyone, especially Justin. I never imagined I'd have to explain this to you. I know that, Willa said. But no, it hadn't occurred to her that she should love her brother in a specific way. She remembered wanting to learn how to be alone, to not need him. She walked in the fields behind the house at the edge of the woods. She lay in the grass for a long time, long enough that she saw herself lying there, and she was no longer a human being. A katydid helicoptered onto her arm and didn't realize it had landed on a person. When she'd gotten back to the house, her body loose and her mind in the grass, her mother jolted her awake and held her by the arm. Are you insane? Her mother said. Willa examined herself, covered in grass and seeds and ticks, which her mother picked off one by one, until she gave up and ordered Willa out of her clothes. They stood on the patio in the backyard, and Willa stripped as slowly as possible. Hurry up, her mother said. What do you think? The rabbits are taking pictures? Thanks.
That was fantastic. There's some great stuff happening in the chat for those of you who haven't visited yet. Please go in and enjoy. Rich, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Our next reader is Josh Riedel, author of Please Report Your Bug Here. Josh worked at tech startups for several years before earning his MFA from the University of Arizona. His short stories have appeared in One Story, Joyland, and Passages North, among others. His first novel, Please Report Your Bug Here, was published by Henry Holt in January of 2023. He lives in San Francisco, California, and the story he published with us is called Midnight Sessions, and here is the first sentence. Late for work, Moot Mangariski raced across the Clio Corp campus to the Research and Development Building, where that morning a crowd of protesters had gathered in the lobby. Take it away, Josh.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, One Story and Greenlight, for having me. And it's an honor to read alongside all of you. This is fantastic. I'm going to read from the prologue of my novel and then like the first couple of pages. My former employer made me sign a non-disclosure agreement. Once you sign an NDA, it's good for life, meaning legally I shouldn't tell you this story, but I have to. I need you to understand when I say I know how to disappear. Let me back up. When I was 24 years old, I signed a contract to work at Date, a new dating app that promised to change the course of love. I worked for Date from September 2010 until July 2011. The startup was based in San Francisco and employed a total of 4 people before it was acquired by the corporation. My friends and family read about the billion-dollar deal in the news and assumed my work was done. Congrats, they texted, so proud. You struck gold in Silicon Valley. But that was nowhere close to true. My work had only just begun. If you've paid attention to the tech industry, you no doubt know what came next, or at least have heard the rumors about what came next. The strange glitches, the secretive tests, the cover-ups. But the news only captured snapshots of what happened, never the full picture. I've attempted to recount in as much detail as possible the events surrounding my discovery. I read through old emails, revisited calendars, and fished to-do lists jotted on the back of faded Muni bus tickets out of books I hadn't opened in years. I hope that by laying out what I know and piecing it together across these pages, I might shed light on the actions of the corporation and how companies like it have grown in its shadow. But I'll admit that writing this hasn't come easily. So many years have passed. Each time I reread this account, I remember something I left out, some detail I must include. And with every edition, the story becomes more fabricated, as if these new facts steer the story closer to fiction. But it's not imagined, I promise you that, at least not to me. All that's changed are the names. Everything else is true. Ethan Block, San Francisco, January 2023. Chapter 1. If I timed it right, I'd make all the lights and speed down Folsom with no hands, the city a foggy blur I glided through on my commute into the office. But such mornings were rare. San Francisco is full of so much I didn't want to miss. A freshly painted mural outside Phil's Coffee on the corner of 24th Street. A mother zipping up her daughter's purple jacket on the porch of a remodeled Victorian duplex. A bearded man singing a song I couldn't catch into a glass bottle microphone. I'd taken all I could as a tunnel of Chinese elms along the southern stretch of the street thinned out and I approached the 101 underpass. With cars rumbling overhead, I'd fix my gaze straight toward the glass high-rises and grip my handlebars tight as Folsom arced into Soma. It was late October 2010, those first few weeks after launch. Our office was in a windowless room that we sublet from a solar panel company. As hundreds of thousands of eligible singles downloaded our app in search of love, we remained three: the founder, the engineer, and me. We worked 16-hour days, leaving the glow of our Apple displays only to refuel on Red Bull and Nature Valley granola bars. We fixed bugs, wrote code, answered support emails, the mundane essentials of invention. I arrived at the office to find the founder and the engineer at their computers, headphones on. The engineer was sporting a San Francisco Giants jersey. The team was in the World Series, but I never heard the engineer talk about baseball, even though sometimes in the evenings we heard fans cheering at the stadium, only blocks from the office. He never talked about anything outside of server errors and software bugs and CrossFit. Maybe he was wearing the jersey for Halloween, I wasn't sure. I leaned my bike against the IKEA couch, sat down at my IKEA desk, and set to work. Thank you.
That was fantastic, Josh. Thanks so much. I love, I feel like I've been zoomed into so many different worlds, so many different universes. It's been fantastic. Thanks, that was great. So our final reader tonight is Laura Spence-Ash, author of Beyond That, the Sea. Laura's debut novel, Beyond That, the Sea, will be published by Celadon Books, just came out March 21st. Her short fiction has appeared in One Story, New England Review, Crazy Horse, and elsewhere. Her critical essays and book reviews appear regularly in the Plowshares blog. She is a founding editor of Craft, which we've all visited and read, right? She received her MFA in fiction from Rutgers Newark, and she lives in New Jersey. And she published a fantastic story with us called The Remains. And here is the opening sentence. Sergeant Bill Marshall was the one who found her white bones in a fetal position, nestled inside a tweed coat and a red woolen hat. Take it away, Laura.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Greenlight. It's such a joy to be here. I'm so excited to be a Deb this year. I can't wait for the party in 2 weeks. So as Hannah said, my novel is Beyond That, the Sea. And it's the story of two families whose lives become intertwined when a British family makes the impossible choice to send their 11-year-old daughter to live with an American family during the war. And the novel follows both families over the next 30 years. It's told from 8 different points of view, everyone in both families. And I'm going to read you a section early in the novel from Beatrix, who's the girl who's sent to America. On the dock in Boston, Beatrix is alone. Everyone else has been picked up. It is already hot, even though it's early in the day, the moon etched in chalk on the pale blue sky. Beatrix is wearing her favorite dress, red wool with a white collar and piping at the cuffs. She picked it out carefully, remembering that her mother told her to look her best, but it is the wrong dress for the day, and sweat drips down her neck and back. The woman who paired up the other children with their host families keeps checking her watch and looking at her clipboard. The Gregorys, she says again and again, her voice getting sharper each time. That's the family name, is that right? Beatrix nods. The sun moves higher, tucks behind a cloud, and Beatrix shifts her weight from one foot to the other. She touches the label that she has repinned every morning since she left London. The edges are beginning to fray. Beatrix feels as though she left home years ago, as though the girl she was there is separate from the girl standing here. So much has transpired, although it has only been 2 weeks, and yet it seems like something out of a book, like it all must have happened to someone else. Docking in Canada and saying goodbye to most of her new friends. Another train and then a small ferry rolling through the rough waves. Finally, calm water as they entered Boston Harbor. On a small island, 3 barefoot children on a dock, holding fishing rods, waving as the ferry passed. Welcome to America, Beatrix thought. She looks down, making sure that her suitcase and gas mask are still at her side, and when she looks up, a boy is standing in front of her. It is almost as though she willed him to exist. He's taller than she is, with curly blonde hair so long it's practically at his collar. He raises his arm to block the sun out of his eyes with his hand. This is William, she thinks, she knows. They had a letter describing the house and the family, and Beatrix read it every night on the ship. She memorized sections. Gerald is the younger boy, just turned 9, and William is 13. He's too smart for his own good, Mrs. Gregory wrote. Wants to be a baseball player when he grows up. Beatrix thought he'd have brown hair. She didn't think he'd be so tall or that his eyes would be green. But still, this must be him. Beatrix, he says, and his voice is lower than she anticipated. He is almost smiling. She nods, and then another boy runs up, his face flushed, his crooked smile wide, his red gold hair shining in the sun. This is most certainly Gerald. You're Beatrix, aren't you, he says. You must be, I just know it. Yes, she says, smiling at last, because his accent is funny and his freckles are everywhere, and he's a wide open American boy. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Laura. We've only got a couple minutes left. And instead of opening it up to questions, I thought we'd do a very quick round robin. And for all these debut writers to offer one very short little piece of advice to anyone else who is trying to maybe also become a debut writer and have your first book. So as you have your first book come out, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to another emerging writer? Let's start with Isaac.
Oh, man. The only thing that you can control is your own work and what you put into it. It's the only thing in your control, and you have to remember that.
That is great. That's really good. Rita, what's a bit of advice you'd give to another emerging writer?
Write about whatever weird crap you want to write, because for years I tried to write things that I thought the market wanted, and that's just not a way to go about your life. So if it's pirates, do it.
I love it. That's great. Rachel, what's a bit of advice that you could give?
Well, I was going to say write what you love, which is very similar. But I guess if you're having a book come out, I would say for promotion, like lean into something that you like to do. Like I don't really like social media, but I try to do it. But I really like going to bookstores and meeting people in person. So I leaned into that, and that was helpful.
Excellent. Talia, what bit of advice would you give to an emerging writer?
I would say embrace and cherish all your writing buddies, because you will all lift each other up.
That is a fantastic bit of advice. David, how about you? What advice would you give to an emerging writer?
I'd say it can be a tumultuous time. So hopefully if you've been writing for a while, you've developed some strong habits. Stick to those. Try to stick to your rituals.
Stick to the rituals. I like that one. Rich, how about you?
I'm going to cheat and say 2. 1 is don't worry about your age. And 2 is find someone that you can talk to and cry to, who's not going to make you embarrassed for doing that.
2 very, very important pieces of advice. Thank you. Josh, how about you? What bit of advice would you give your past self?
I'd say get off the computer and go outside.
Excellent. All right, Laura, bring us home. What's one piece of advice that you'd give to an emerging writer?
I think find your people, find the people that are in the same publishing, year as you, and get to know them and hang out with them, because that's incredibly helpful.
Excellent. That was a fantastic way to end this wonderful night. We will see you all. I can't wait in 2 weeks in Brooklyn. We're going to have a fabulous time. You're all going to see each other, get each other's books. I hope as many people who zoomed in today, thank you for joining us and getting to know these writers. Please buy their books. Please buy them at Greenlight Bookstore. There are links in the chat, or you can just go to their website. Supporting independent bookstores is vital to the literary community. It's vital to emerging writers like this, and it's vital to organizations like One Story. So one more round of applause for these amazing writers sharing their fantastic books with us. And thank you so much to Greenlight. Bye, everyone.